Hi. Oh, there it is.
Hey, hey, hi. Hi, hi.
Hello. Uh, just want to give everyone a few announcements as we get started today. Miracle, who's here with us, gave me a little flyer that they will be happy to hand out. Has a business named Miracles Makings, and so they're going to be at Julietta Market in June, July, and August. So if you would like to come out and support, Charles gave me some information on the play. What's the name of the play? I'm blanking out. Angels in America soon this month, as well as also this month, each Sunday, I think starting today, the Kentucky Theater is showing it next Sunday. Thank you. Next Sunday, all throughout June, they are showing different movies, queer movies with the host. And one of them on Pride Sunday, and I'll be too tired to go, is this awesome movie called Beautiful Thing. And if you've never seen it, I do actually encourage you to watch that movie because I watched that while I was at Asbury. I know. They didn't block it either. Anyways, they might now that I just said it out loud on a microphone, but there we go. But I watched it back in 2008 to 2012. So that another thing that is pretty exciting was this past week a Woven podcast just got approved called Queering the Air. So Daniel and I will co-host it.
I think this is the first official announcement.
Yeah, I think it is because we didn't announce it this morning, did we?
No. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and so Andrew and Matt Harling will also be producing and helping us make it, and we're going to be hoping for a fall launch for that, probably September, October sometime. So wanted to get all of that out there.
Logan and Daniel will be the hosts.
Yeah, Daniel and I are hosting it, and I don't know. It'll be told from a queer perspective, so that could be real fun and an interesting lane that is not happening in church circles, is safe to say. So, so we just want to say a welcome to everyone here and online. We want to say, although I do want to say Happy Pride, I also want to say this Pride Month, let's really reflect on the fact that queer people and trans people are under attack at a different level than we've had in history. So even though it is a happy time for those of us who are queer, we also really need to stand up and fight in the ways that we can and what that looks like for us. But you're welcome here, whether you're queer or not queer, your views of God, the Bible, we just appreciate you being here as you are today. Like all things woven, we do not do anything in any particular order. So John and I are going to start by talking.
So here we go.
And the art stuff is going to be afterwards because it's going to be around questions and stuff that John and I talk about. And today our topic is kind of fun.
This is a great way to do it.
I know. It worked out really well last week.
I love that, Daniel.
Also, even though Alex isn't here, shout out because this happened as an accident last week, and it meant the service got to end with "fuck you," which was a really cool way to end the service. So I really love that so much in my soul. Because and I guess I should say this: the podcast will be PG-13, so they'll be editing out all of me saying "fuck."
Unlike Woven, it will
Yeah.
be PG-13.
Yeah. So they will edit out all of my bad words that I inevitably say. So today we are talking about an idea of being a bicultural space. And for us, that means being a space that's straight, which most churches are, and a place that's queer. And that doesn't just mean attendees. That means the culture itself. And we invite cultural elements from both communities into the conversation, which is really fucking hard to do. But why don't I'm going to let you start on this of where this idea originated in your head and kind of a path forward that you see of us beginning to transition into this kind of culture.
Sure. So the idea of a multicultural church has been around for some time. But specifically, really, the last 40 years, it's been talked about quite a bit. But it's almost always talked about in racial terms or ethnic terms. So there are some multicultural churches that have black and white or Latino and white. I don't know of any that have been black and Latino.
I don't either, actually.
The one place where we see it is in expat churches. So when you're in the Congo, and there's one church there in Kinshasa that is sort of your church, it's going to have people from a lot of different cultures in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Europe, we see multicultural churches fairly often. America, it's extremely rare. And when it is, I've never known it to be more than bicultural. You try to put in a third culture, and it's really, really difficult. So this idea came with, we've always been we came out of a queer, our history is that the way we were founded was we want to make a place that is a queer church,
Mm-hmm.
or at least that is affirming, And I don't think a lot of us straight people know that there is queer culture.
I think that could be true.
And so the idea of...
I'm laughing at Daniel, sorry. The eye contact we made was really good. You go ahead.
Was it affirming of that belief?
Yes, it was. It for sure was.
I think people in affirming churches like Beaumont, like the 11 o'clock, and the other affirming churches in Lexington, almost all believe that they are monocultural churches, that they are churches that are for everybody.
Right.
Because there's only one sort of culture.
Right.
And so where this idea came from was, I don't remember, at one point you said something that clued me in. Daniel had been hinting at it for some time, but I never understood it or picked it up. But at one point
it's good to know Daniel and I are having similar conversations with you, just at different times.
Well, so that's how my life works, is my wife tells me stuff until I think I made it up.
Your vulnerability there, I really appreciate that so much.
Yeah. So I made up this idea about this bicultural church.
You know what? I'll give it to you.
And the idea was, I don't know what you said, but Logan said something that finally occurred to me. Wait, this is a whole different culture. It's not just people that think just like I do, and whose the form of church is the same way that I think of the form in church. This is essentially a different culture than what I understand.
Yeah, I think I remember, because I think you had literally just asked me a question. So how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing good. I have this thing on my mind, which is I don't know how to be myself in spaces. I genuinely have trouble with that. And I think I was talking to you probably about my day job in that moment of, I'm always feel like I'm putting on some mask and a performance. And so you even asked me about this space. I'm like, yeah, I'm the director. There's a performance element to this, right? There just is. You don't just get to show up and be yourself, which is very unique. Not that people don't self-protect in all sorts of cultures, they do. But that is something unique about the relationship between queer people and church in particular. Because most of the time it's about conformity. Come in, conform, be a part of our norms. We'll be an affirming space. You can marry, you can sleep with, and do whatever you want, but conform to our rules, regulations, our way of being, our way of life. And I was just like, I don't feel like I have an area in my life where I just get to be Logan.
Yeah, that's right. You know, so it had occurred to me earlier when I was teaching at Asbury that we were an extremely white culture. And I wish Caleb were here to be in on this with me. But I had a black worship arts major, a lady, and I don't know. I think it was she was in class one day, and we have a rule against people wearing hats in class, in chapel or in class. And she had on like a hairpiece that, you know, I'm not sure if it was a hat or a hairpiece. It's hard to tell, right? What do you call that? And the professor asked her to take it off because he felt like it was a hat. And so she's like, she didn't say what the fuck, but that's what was
Yeah.
the idea.
Right.
Like, and I don't know, I explored it a little bit more with her when she was telling me about the situation.
Wow.
And I don't know why, but for the first time it occurred to me that what we said was, yes, we would love to have black people here, as long as you are adapt to our culture. And it was just this moment of like, what in the world? We say we want other cultures, but what we mean is we want other cultures to become like ours.
Right.
Or at least to be subservient to ours. So when you said something, whatever that was,
Yeah.
and I think it was probably that conversation, it occurred to me for the first time, in our churches, we have said, absolutely, we are affirming. We want gay people here. We want all kinds of queer people here. As long as you adapt to how we do church.
Right.
And so that was just like, it was a moment for me of, wait, what if we made a true bicultural church where Logan doesn't have to hide,
Right.
where you can wear eye makeup,
Yeah. As I do.
as you do. And I don't know if I'm going to start wearing it or not, but I think it.
I can hook you up. I have enough. I have enough. It is
Pride Month.
It is Pride Month.
It is Pride Month, so I'm for whatever solidarity. I even had a tattoo once. Well, not a real one, but it looked like a real one. It was right here, and it was a dragon.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have 19.
Yeah. So I didn't quite match that,
Yeah.
but I have a picture of it, and it was a very cool dragon. So Michelle did it, and yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So the point is, what if we made a space where this isn't me inviting queer people
Right.
to my culture, but this is people from different cultures
Right.
saying, how do we submit to one another, love one another?
Right.
How do we interact with each other's culture in a way that I think is like what the Holy Spirit invites humanity to do?
I love that. I want to talk about one area that I think is a unique challenge for, and I'm more talking about the 11 o'clock than here, right? But whenever you include liturgical elements in your service, and this is kind of a unique challenge people have. And I am bringing this up because I've actually watched the 11 o'clock service really shift away from this. But whenever I first started attending the 11 o'clock service a couple years ago, everything was fear-based. We're bad.
This is the liturgy.
Yeah, the liturgy was very fear-based. We're bad. A lot of repentance talk. I'm good with it in a call to confession, because that's what a confession is owning the things that you need to work on. Okay, that makes sense to me. But like, I was like, this is a lot. But I think that's a broader thing within church. And I don't even know that Woven is exempt from this, although we really try. And that is actually being about radical love and not actually being about fear. And so much of that has to do with, because the sacred text that churches use being the Bible, it has a lot of fear-based language in it. And so it makes it hard, and I know this because I speak a couple times at the 11 o'clock, like, it's sometimes hard to pick a passage, right?
Yeah,
Because the
sure.
passage can be,
Yeah.
even if you can actually present a better idea, the challenge is even some people hearing those passages because of their own trauma and stuff from their childhoods and stuff, it could completely derail anything a person says around that passage. And I do want to talk about that first because I think that is our big obstacle
Right.
in being bicultural, is reckoning with the hundreds of years of texts where we've really created systems and organized around it rather than actually being probably what Jesus was doing, almost certainly actually the way Jesus was behaving in person, because we've married ourselves into institutionalism and politics and all of those things. So how do we deal with that piece?
Yeah. Well, so the liturgy that we were using a couple years ago was coming out of a traditional, very straight place.
Mm-hmm. No surprise.
And I also thought it was just dull, so there was that too. But
That's fair, actually.
yeah,
And that is part of it, too.
but there's so much of the fear element because I think that has been the MO of the church for most of our 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Has been, at least from the 300s on,
Mm-hmm.
has been based on a foundation of fear. So specifically, I mean fear of God.
Yeah. In fact, many translations of the Bible use that phrase, fear of God, and they try to convince you that's a good
Yeah, right.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. So the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you've been at any kind of Christian thing, evangelical thing in your life, you will have heard that phrase. It's a verse from the Bible. You will have heard it. And that, you're exactly right. That is, in a verse, that is sort of the message of a lot of the scriptures.
Right.
So if we're Christian and basing sort of our beliefs around the Bible, then how do you deal with something that is antithetical to the culture you're trying to create, and or at least to be a part of, and these words? So here's the suggestion, and this is what I try to do at the 11 service, is I try to do what Jesus did, which was to cherry pick the scriptures.
And Jesus cherry-picked the scripture.
Jesus absolutely cherry-picked. So when I was in evangelicalism, there was a constant talk about reading verses in context.
Which is so funny.
It's
I just
so
want to
funny.
I want to diatribe because
I know.
they absolutely did not read them in context. But that's fine.
Yeah.
That was
So there's that. But there's also neither Jesus nor Paul quoted scriptures in context whatsoever.
right.
They're almost all just cherry-picked, not just even verses. Sometimes Jesus picks just part of a verse.
Right. To speak to that culture.
To speak, yes, and just to say, this is what God was really trying to get at. I've got part of a verse from Leviticus. The rest of it is crap, but there's this little bit, and I'm going to pull that out and say, love your neighbor as yourself, and that's the point. It's a small. It's not even a whole verse in Leviticus, and Jesus says this is the point. So
I
one
love that
way
so
we
much.
can do that is by trying to get into the scriptures and get into the parts that I think were actually God's message, and not all of the ancient cultural stuff,
Right.
that it was all filtered through.
This is a unique challenge, though, right? Because a lot of spaces do struggle with that because of just how the system itself is set up. And I'm asking this because that definitionally to be bicultural, that means we have to queer the system.
That's right, exactly.
And that is easier said than done when it's got a. And I remember when I was at Asbury, there were a lot of even contemporary performers who would critique what you were trying to do. Like, they thought us just doing a different style of music was radical, and we were denying a rich history. I mean, I literally heard people come and tell us that often. And so how do you get around that, right? Because people care about that history. Sometimes, and I mean this with really grace and space for people to process, but sometimes more than they care about radically loving the people who are in the space. So how do we reckon with that? Because that's going to be part of this, right?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, let me go back for a moment. I think instead of queering the system, we need to start with queer. And how do we make system that makes sense in that culture? So, for instance, one of the things we've done is we've moved to this pod talk kind of format.
Right.
Like, we're not trying to fix how we speak. We're just changing the whole thing. We're starting from a different foundational place. We're going to have these kinds of talks because this is a queer kind of form. Whereas speaking is a straight kind of form. When you're a solo speaker, you are saying, this is the way it is.
Well, it's so true, right? Because if you think about one definition of queer by bell hooks includes the idea, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and that has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. That really is how podcasts started, right? People didn't like the regurgitation of how they receive news on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, you get the drift. And they wanted to absorb it in a different style. And now this, like, most people get their news from podcasts because they found out, especially for millennials who grew up post 9/11, we were only getting one side of the story right, and we had to watch The Daily Show, which I did, to actually get to hear truth about something because of power structures. So that is interesting because I do think that is a really good way of reading in this, right?
So the straight idea is a power source coming out.
Right.
The pod talk idea is this sharing of power together.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't have an audience, it's a sharing of power. And so it's coming out of a queer space. So that would be, I just wanted to mention.
That was really
good. We don't want
good.
to just adapt what we've done.
Right.
We want to foundationally move from what queer space, what form would look like. The second thing is, what do we do about history and the scriptures? I think with the scriptures, Jesus, I think, was so right in almost everything that he talks about. How he did that in that culture, I just think is astounding. Like, it was as if God were in him. And so for those of us who believe he was God, it's like he was saying, in this culture, I'm going to do the best that I can to tell you to move us towards a better place. And so that's one. I think we want to really focus in on Jesus and on those words. And the other is, I think we just let a lot of stuff go. And this isn't going to be the church for every place.
Yeah.
For everybody.
In fact, actually being bicultural probably means definitionally it's smaller.
Absolutely.
Like because of just, again, whenever you're trying to create something that's healthy and holistic, right? When or people can just attend a power structure that they already know and are comfortable with and has that flow, people are often going to pick that.
Yeah, and this is so hard because in general, love comes from sameness.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as you make something not monocultural but bicultural, now you have to deal with, so what does that mean for love?
Mm-hmm.
If love is from sameness. So the other side of love is from sameness is growth is from diversity.
Hmm.
And so what we're suggesting is that we are going to we want a church that's going to be about our changing and actually growing because we have diversity. And as we change and understand each other, there will be more sameness. And not sameness of culture,
No.
but sameness like of understanding.
Right.
And that's how the love will grow. Not by being the same and like saying all the same stuff, being in one culture, but by understanding each other, doing the hard work of growth and diversity
Yeah.
is actually a way of producing sameness and love.
Yeah. And it also is a default invitation to whatever your whatever marginalized community is near you, right? Because that's something Jesus did by default, right? Is if you're willing to go outside of your lane of growth that you think you're already in, you're already including people that are different from you because you have to grow from somewhere.
That's right.
And it's almost exclusively in some sort of covenantal community style. And that gives us actually permission to actually care about at least a group of marginalized. Now, you broke down the boundaries in it of like, you can only go so far with that in that communal way. Otherwise, it breaks upon itself most of the time. We just don't have. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard.
The reason it works in expat churches is because there are no alternatives.
Mm.
If we try to do it in America where there are alternatives, people won't pick it.
That makes so much sense.
And the reason this is tricky, for instance, the more of the 11 o'clock moves into a bicultural space, the more people will want to leave.
That makes sense.
Because it's the hard work of diversity.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And they have choices. There are lots of other places they can go.
Yeah, but it's also interesting too, right? Because the flip side of that is the people who do go through it, they find a lot of common good.
That's right.
And an expansive growth of self, in all honesty. Like, so much of life for people, and I hear it in this space all the time, right? Like, so many people are in this collective state of grief right now for very good reasons, because it's a very challenging time, especially for people who are in this culture. And that grief looks a little different, right? For some people who have recently graduated, it is trying to find that job that is non-existent in this culture. And I so feel you. I am flashbacking to 2012 and whenever I was in that struggle, right? Like, those jobs are hard to find. But there's something about love without fear. Because here's the thing, right? It's really going to be the fear that drives it, because it's going to be the fear of the change and the fear of the growth. But the payoff is that you actually find that your capacity to love enlarges and makes you more,
Yes, that's exactly
at least like how Jesus presented themselves in the gospel.
That's right.
And I think that's
This
the
really
beautiful part.
I don't know how to become more like Jesus without creating spaces of diversity.
Right.
You know, so we raised our kids as homeschoolers,
Mm-hmm.
and we homeschooled our kids, and we were a part of a very large, actually, homeschool community. And for most homeschoolers, the idea is to become to separate from culture as much as possible and create your own in the home. So most homeschoolers are isolationists. They want to pull in, protect their kids, and we are going to just do our own thing. So our idea was, as homeschoolers, how do we expose our kids to as many cultures as possible? And so that was a counter cultural thing, just a piece of it. But here was the interesting thing about the isolationists, especially all of those homeschoolers. So many of them needed to be a part of a small church. Because if it got very large, there was too much difference between what they believed and what the church believed. So they had to find a church that was small enough to believe just like they believed. And so when they found out that there was some difference with the pastor, then they would leave that church and go find another church where they could agree 100% with the doctrine of the church. And so what you find is the stronger all of those like isolationist elements that a
Right.
person has, the smaller the group has to become.
Yeah. Well, you know what you're saying, and this is so funny, and I would be really curious about the queer representation of this, right? That's what I felt like when I had to come out. I felt like my group had to get smaller. I let go.
Yeah, that
Just
was
as many as people who let go of me in friendship, like, and there was that. I had to let go of people because in my process of becoming myself, I felt so unsafe at a big table. I really did. It was so challenging, and especially because, like, I'm starting this process, right? Pre-Supreme Court ruling and all of these things. So, like, I was being rather ballsy, and I'd gone through a shit ton of spiritual trauma in the process of it. And so having anyone interconnected with some of those things that were triggering, I sadly had to say, I can't do this. And I think that, and there's so much grace and space for the people who can't do it. Like, I get it. But what we are advocating for, and I think this is going to be, in my biased opinion, and I have to own my own bias in all this, I think this is going to be the great rub for churches in any space with queer people in it, where they're actually affirmed and wanted, is at some point, it's not enough to give them that table they don't want to sit at. At some point, you need to reflect the fact that people want a different table.
That's really good.
Like, that's, I mean, because that's really a challenge. And that was the thing with me, with my own coming out, was it was like, I can't sit with the same group and do this. That grouping has to be different. Now, a few remained, and that was cool, but that wasn't the majority by any stretch.
And I think that's part of the challenge of what we're in, is the church has been so oppressive to queer people.
That's right.
That I think it's very difficult to convince a queer person that this is actually a safe place. And not just a safe place, like that we're going to allow them to be here.
Right.
A safe place as in you get to be foundationally what this church is.
Yeah, and a lot of, and that even includes when they give you a seat at the table, right? Is like, they might give, and I have been given here a seat at the table, and that's a really beautiful thing, and I'm really grateful for that. But what took a lot longer for this space to give me was a space for me to feel brave to be myself.
That's right, yeah.
I felt like as long as I follow in line, and like, and those people who sit on my mentoring team, and you hear this from me all the time, is I'm always saying, I'm just waiting until I hear that phrase that I've pushed it too far, and they said, okay, we're done with you. And I still, and that is this gnawing thing in the back of my mind. And you and I have been friends for a long time, right? But that is this thing where it's like, will that happen? Because it's already happened, right? History has taught so many queer people that these spaces are just not even just unsafe, but if you dare to try to be yourself and not conform, you'll be uninvited all over again. So even though you may not be traumatized the same way, they still believe that they'll be uninvited if they are truly themselves. And it's been this interesting conversation for a lot of queer people I hear, is they miss a lot of the elements of church, but they can't get over that hurdle of, if I'm going to do this, I have to conform and I have to play the part and I have to be in a role. And I think this is a hard conversation to have but it's important because it's Pride Month and this is a time where people have to celebrate, and we're trying to do something big in this space, but that's people's lived realities, unfortunately.
And what we're aiming for here is more of having a straight month than we are having our Pride Month.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
we're aiming for that to be just a part of who we are.
Right.
That is who we are.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe once a year we'll celebrate some straight people.
Sounds great.
That's cool. But if that feels like, ooh, off to you, imagine how a gay person feels all of the time.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in this season of life, as I alluded to here, in a political climate that's far more divisive than what we were talking about even a year ago.
That's right.
And that's the other part of it.
We've gone so backwards in 1 year as a larger culture.
Right. And so that's kind of this interesting thing, which is why I am really interested in queering spaces.
Exactly.
Because I think these spaces
good.
have to embrace. And here's the thing, right? Again, and this is going to be kind of the fun part, definitionally, like, queer means just embracing a lot of your uniqueness and bringing it into a space. So, like, you don't have to be attracted to same sex or pronouns or certain romantical ways, right? Like, you get to bring your own queerness to this, and that still counts. And that's another part of this that people don't do. And I think that's the part with history that we're going to have to look at, right? You know, we're learning things about political figures all the time with queerness that was probably hidden on purpose. We are.
For sure.
And it's time that we start actually looking at our own religious history. And this is not unique to Christian. This is all religion. And start thinking about those differently and embracing those things. So before we go into this time, I have one question for you. What is your current definition of queer?
Oh, shoot.
I told Daniel I wasn't going to give you a heads up on this.
Yeah. In a large way, I think of queer as a microcosm for anyone who has been on the margin. So for me, queer is a little bit larger term.
Right.
You know, I love the inclusive flag that has race as well as gender and sexual orientation. That it sort of has all of that, and for me, that's the sort of the larger picture of queer. It's hard for me as the most privileged person on the planet to say, to call myself queer.
Mm-hmm.
I because then I'm afraid it will lose its meaning. I don't know how I, as the most privileged person, can also be on the margins. Now, I do believe I can have a real empathy, and I hope that's all I got right now. That's what I'm going for.
That's beautiful, and I'll end it with this. I hope that spaces change enough to where you don't have to feel like the most privileged person on the planet, because that's really what I hope. That's my hope, is that this radical love will overdo fear in religious spaces at such a level that flips to where people don't feel so privileged in that way.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Wouldn't that be
That
wonderful?
would be fantastic.
So we've talked about all these things, and now Daniel's going to lead us in a very fun art project about being bicultural.
Well, this is more going to be an invitation than a leading, per se. The things, first of all, great job, Logan and John. Thank you for the conversation. It's truly, yes, please. Like, so good. And a really great preview of what our upcoming podcast is going to be. So that's also exciting. But hearing all of the wonderful ideas talked about, I wanted to make a space for us to kind of process that, to think about it, and to also create something out of it. So what I have here are a bunch of different markers, pens, Sharpies, crayons, and some little cards. And I have one prompt. What does bicultural community mean to you? What does or could it look like? And so if you would like to, please come sit at this table, draw, talk amongst each other, kind of debrief per se. And yeah, later these cards will do something cool with them. I have ideas that I don't want to share just yet because they're not fully fleshed out. But without further ado, let's make art because art is resistance.